A mysterious old man walked into a dojo famous on social media, a place filled with flashy young martial artists. No one expected that with just a tattered cloth and 5 words, he would silence the entire dojo and make them kneel in respect. They didn't know he was Chuck Norris, until every ego was defeated, without a single punch thrown. A truth hidden for 30 years was finally revealed. That afternoon, the sky had the pale yellow hue of an old letter. The wind slipped through the maple trees in front of the Kenzo martial arts complex. A large glass sign hung between 2 black steel pillars, reflecting the slanted sun of late autumn. Beneath the sign, an LED line blinked continuously. Where New Age warriors gather, live and fight like a star. Inside, the atmosphere was buzzing. Shouts of, "Yeah!" bounced off the mirrored walls and polished wooden floors like drumbeats. Students of all ages, from teens to adults, were training under blinding white LED lights spread across tatami mats that covered the floor. At the center, Sensei Kaito Ru was filming a new promo video. He wore a stylized gi with metallic red trim and the words "Beast Mode" embroidered on the hip, a style beloved by youth. His smoke-colored dyed hair was slicked back with gel, and his beard was shaved to laser-sharp precision. A wireless mic clipped to his lapel carried every word clearly, sharp as a blade. Remember, when you raise your knee for the spinning kick, imagine your opponent is live streaming and you've got 3 seconds to blow their mind, Kaito said loudly, finishing with a flawless spinning heel kick that nearly grazed the ceiling. The whole dojo erupted in applause. A group of teenage students cheered while an assistant's camera captured every angle. That clip was sure to be posted on TikTok tonight, with captions like, 3-second spinning kick, hack, make the world say wow. At that moment, the dojo door opened. No one noticed. A man stepped in quietly. He wore no gi, no athletic shoes. Instead, he had on worn leather shoes with flattened soles and a faded grey coat, the collar fraying with age. He paused at the threshold, removed his shoes, folded them neatly, and placed them at the corner. An old-school ritual only traditional martial arts students still remembered. No one paid attention. He walked into the bright hall and chose a shaded corner behind a pillar where no lights reached. He sat down, back straight, hands resting gently on his knees. Kaito, still immersed in his end-of-class interaction segment, glanced toward the man and frowned slightly. He stopped the filming, signaled for the session to pause, and walked over to the stranger. "Do you have an appointment?" Kaito asked, polite but cold. The man looked at him for a moment. His eyes were bright, deep, and calm like pebbles beneath a stream. Then he spoke in a husky yet warm voice. "No, I just came to return a cloth." Kaito raised an eyebrow. "Cloth? What do you mean?" The man didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached into his inner coat pocket and pulled out a small piece of fabric wrapped in old newspaper. He unwrapped it slowly. It was a torn cloth, frayed at the edges, with dried, rust-colored bloodstains on the ivory surface. No one understood. Kaito let out a half-mocking chuckle. "You came to my dojo to bring a rag?" He turned to the students and announced loudly, "Looks like we've got a special guest today. A cloth deliverer." Some laughter followed. The man didn't react. He simply folded the cloth again, placed it on his lap, and looked toward the far end of the dojo. There, a group of young students was practicing basic techniques. Among them was a skinny boy, about 13, with curly hair and freckles. He didn't shout like the others. When he attempted a side kick, he lost his balance and fell. Another student laughed. No one noticed, except the man. Later, when the session ended, Kaito approached again, now with a blend of curiosity and irritation in his tone. "If you want to join a class, we register students on Tuesdays, or if you're looking to rest, There's a cafe across the street. My treat. The man smiled gently. I didn't come to learn. I'd just like to train with your weakest student. That sentence, quiet though it was, froze the air. Kaito frowned. Excuse me? I want to train with the weakest student. Just 15 minutes. No filming, no sparring, just practice. Something about his tones silenced the room. Not the request itself, but how it was delivered. Not desperate, not arrogant, just simple. Like someone who had stood in this exact spot a long, long time ago, long enough to remember. Kaito laughed aloud. All right then, if that's what you want. He turned to the group of young students. Yuta, come here. The skinny boy, the one who had fallen earlier, startled and stepped forward. His face paled. He didn't know what he had done wrong. The man stood, nodding gently to the boy. He didn't touch him, only observed how he stood. Slumped shoulders, downcast eyes, his hands gripping his gi. All the signs of someone used to being underestimated, just like he was, 60 years ago. What's your name? The man asked. Yuta, sir. How long have you been training? Just 3 months, sir. Do you want to quit? Yuta lowered his head even more. Yes. Have you been bullied? The boy hesitated, then nodded faintly. The man nodded in return, then turned to Kaito and said, Give me 15 minutes. Continued in next message. Continued English translation, Part 2. Time seemed to pause. No music, no stage lights, no cameras. Just a silver-hailed man in a faded coat, and a young student standing on the wooden floor. The man began by adjusting the boy's posture, not with force, just a subtle tilt of the head, a guiding gesture. The boy responded immediately. Then he taught a simple movement, strong stance, steady breath, balance. No need to kick, no need to punch, just stand firm like a rooted tree. Yuto followed. Once, then twice. By the third time, he didn't fall. The entire dojo, silent. No one laughed. No one spoke. Kaito sat at the far end. He didn't understand why he felt uneasy. An old man, standing quietly, no loud commands, no slogans, yet somehow the whole dojo had stopped to watch. The attention was drifting away from him, something he had spent his whole youth building. He leaned toward his assistant and whispered, Call Kenzo, get ready. And that's when the first ripples of a true storm began to form on the smooth surface of Kensei Dojo. The first chill of winter slipped through the cracks in the doors, carrying the musty scent from the rear courtyard, where bamboo leaves lay scattered. Inside, the lights stayed steady, unchanged, but the atmosphere had shifted. No more laughter, no more applause, only the stillness of a frozen lake. At the center of the floor, the silver Airman continued guiding Yuta's stance. Every move had a certain rhythm, as if he were performing a ceremony. No excess, no lack. His hand trembled slightly, but his eyes were as steady as steel. The boy seemed to sense something, not glamour but safety. He stood a little straighter, breathed a little slower. But on the distant bench, another movement was taking place. Kenzo, the dojo's star student, had arrived. His red-dyed hair was still damp with sweat from morning gym. He wore a black gi with a loosely tied brown belt, intentionally exposing a shoulder tattoo, a barcode with the words, "Only God can judge me." His eyes squinted at the old man on the floor. "What is this? A workshop for senior citizens?" Kenzo muttered, loud enough for nearby students to hear. Kaito walked up beside him and gave a small nod. "Get ready, a light demo." "What? You want me to kick the old guy into next week?" Kenzo scoffed. Kaito didn't answer, but the smirk at the corner of his lips was answer enough. The session ended earlier than usual. Students shifted to the sides, forming an informal ring around the main floor. Some secretly turned on their phones, ignoring the no recording rule. The peculiarity of the moment made all rules feel pliable. Kaito stepped into the center, clapping 3 sharp times. The sound sliced the air. "Everyone," he said, voice booming like a TV host, "today we are honored to host a special guest. He didn't come to learn, nor to teach. He simply wants to practice with our weakest student." A few chuckles. Kaito continued, "And I agreed because martial arts is about sharing, about challenges and opportunity." He turned to the old man. "Sir, what would you like to share with us?" The man stepped forward. The light caught his graying hair, casting a dull silver glow. He scanned the room, not with resentment nor hesitation. Just the stillness of someone who's walked through much louder places. "I have nothing to share," he said. "I only want to stand here and watch a child learn to stand firm. That's enough." Kaito squinted. "You don't approve anything?" "No," the man replied. "I only came to return a promise." Kenzo stepped onto the floor from the right. He cracked his wrists and ankles with loud pops, reminding everyone his body was a weapon. He didn't bow, just smirked. "You want to train with the weakest? I'm the strongest. Want to try me?" A ripple passed through the students. "Is this a real match?" someone whispered. The old man stared at Kenzo, then turned to Kaito. "Is this your best student?" Kaito nodded. "Then I have one condition." The air tightened. "I don't want to film. No photos, no applause. I only have one item." He pulled from his pocket the same worn cloth. Its color nearly faded into the fibers. He placed it gently in the center of the floor. "When he touches this cloth, the match begins." Kenzo laughed. "What is this? Some kind of ninja test?" The old man said nothing. He stepped back a few paces. His stance looked relaxed, arms loose, as if nothing mattered. But those with a trained eye would see. His toes angled inward slightly, left hand subtly open, weight shifted back. Not accidental. It was positioning. The match hadn't begun, but the dojo stopped breathing. Kenzo took slow steps toward the cloth. His eyes still marked, but there was a flicker of caution. He'd never seen anyone stand like that. Not a stance ready to kick, not a boxer's guard, but something that made him hesitate. One more step. The old man's eyes stayed fixed on Kenzo's feet. One more step, then pause before the cloth. Kenzo raised his foot and stepped on it, just enough to wrinkle its edge under his shoe. At that exact moment, the man spoke. His voice cracked open, clear to every corner of the dojo. "You just stepped on the cloth that once wiped the blood of a boy abandoned in this dojo because of bullying. That boy was me. And the one who taught me to win without fighting was someone your sensei never spoke of." No one moved. No one laughed. Kaito froze. Kenzo, stunned. Silence, heavy as stone. A young female student, around 20, whispered, "What does he mean?" No one answered. The old man raised his head. For the first time, he looked Kaito directly in the eyes. 30 years ago," he said slowly, "I was the kid at the end of the line, like Yuta. Every time I kicked wrong, I was pushed aside. Every time I fell, people laughed. One day, I fell so hard I bled from my nose. I cried. No one helped me up. Only an old teacher handed me this cloth. He raised it for all to see, threadbare and worn. He told me, 'Don't let pain make you weak. Keep it to remember.'" The dojo was silent. "I kept this cloth for 30 years. Today I return it. Not because I forgot, but because I forgive." Kenzo didn't know what to do with his hands. They trembled slightly. He had never been stopped by words, especially not by a story. He looked at Kaito, hoping for an order, a rebuttal, but Kaito stood frozen. His face was pale. There was something in the old man's gaze, piercing straight through Kaito's layers of success, fame, and viral videos. Kaito knew very well that the story was true, because he had stood on the sidelines that day, 30 years ago, watching a boy get pushed out of the dojo, and said nothing. That boy's name was Charles. And Charles now stood before them as Chuck Norris. The silence in the dojo wasn't that of spectators watching a demonstration. It was the silence that fell after a dust cloth had been lifted from a memory buried for decades. Time felt suspended. No one dared cough. Kenzo took a half step back from the cloth, his soul still sensing the wrinkled fabric. Sweat beaded on his temple, not from exertion, but because he realized he had just touched something very real, very alive, and very dangerous to his ego. He looked at Chuck, no longer the old stranger, but a living monument. Yet what made Kenzo furious wasn't that the man was Chuck Norris, it was that he hadn't needed to throw a single punch. And Kenzo, the award-winning fighter, teen martial arts magazine cover boy, 1.2 million followers on Instagram, was being eclipsed by just 5 sentences. Kaito remained motionless near the wall, his hand tensed, fingers scratching at his palm, an old nervous habit from his assistant days. His eyes wavered between confusion, fear, or was it guilt? He remembered young Charles clearly. Small, quiet, always at the back of the line. And that last time when Charles had been kicked off the mat by a bigger student, blood dripping from his lip, no one offered a cloth. Kaito had only watched, didn't help, didn't speak. And the next day the boy was gone. Now Charles stood here, his name now Chuck Norris, and Kaito realized a match was inevitable, not between two people, but between ego and forgiveness. Kenzo, torn inside, suddenly blurted, "Fine. If you want to prove your so-called honor, then fight. Right now, no rules, no mercy. Let's see who you really are." Some students gasped. One whispered, "Kenzo, Kenzo." But Kenzo wasn't listening. His mind was clouded red, part rage, part shame, and a deeper fear of being irrelevant. Chuck Norris said nothing. He looked down at the cloth, then bent, folded it carefully, and slid it back into his coat. Then he removed his jacket. Underneath was a simple black cotton shirt, hugging a lean but solid frame, not bulky like a bodybuilder's, but the muscle of someone who had trained steadily for a lifetime. He stepped forward. "You want a real fight?" he asked, eyes level. Kenzo nodded. Chuck turned to Kaito. "Permission?" Kaito exhaled sharply, part wanting to stop it and part unable to. He nodded. The two faced off. No count, no start signal. Kenzo struck first. A quick jab, testing. Chuck tilted his head. Dodged. Kenzo followed with a low sweep to knock the support leg. Chuck lifted his leg, not countering, just absent from the spot. A breath of awe spread through the dojo. Those who knew martial arts understood evading a hit wasn't rare, but evading with no effort, no retreat, just precise angles, that was another level. Kenzo escalated, a 3-head combo, jab, hook, cut, uppercut. Chuck didn't block, didn't guard, just flowed like water. Each strike narrowly missed, but none connected. Kenzo growled. He felt like he was punching smoke. The harder he attacked, the more frustrated he grew. Rage rose from his chest. His strikes lost discipline, launched like fireworks, unplanned. And Chuck calmly avoided them all, stepping back only as much as needed, maintaining the perfect distance. Kenzo spun with a kick. Chuck tilted. Kenzo rushed in. Chuck weaved like a stream. Finally, after a flurry of blows, Kenzo was out of breath, shoulders dropped, breathing ragged. Chuck never retaliated, not once, not a single strike. "Matt," broke in Zoe. "You're mocking me?" Kenzo barked. "Trying to humiliate me in front of everyone? Make me look like a joke?" Chuck didn't respond right away. He stepped closer, not fast, just gently, and spoke low, only for Kenzo. "You don't need me to make you a joke. Your ego already did that." Kenzo stood frozen. Chuck continued. "You're talented, very, but you don't know when to stop. You don't know what's enough. You don't know when to bow, not to submit, but to learn." Kenzo turned his face away, eyes burning. The dojo's energy shifted. Students began bowing their heads. No applause. No phones. Just honest reverence. Yuta, the smallest student, tiptoed beside Kenzo. He looked up at Chuck, then bowed low. "Thank you, sir," he whispered. "No need to thank me," Chuck smiled. "Just remember, a warrior isn't the one who wins the most fights, but the one who keeps peace in his heart through the biggest ones." At the edge of the dojo, Kaito stood silently, leaning against the wall. His eyes shimmered, an emotion rare in his 20 years as an instructor. He had been a coach of egos, fame, and performance, but now he understood. No million-view video could compare to a minute of this dojo's silence. Then something unexpected happened. Kenzo dropped to one knee. He bowed his head low, hands pressed together before his forehead. It wasn't a defeat, it was a surrender, not to strength, but to understanding. As his knee touched the tatami floor, the dojo's atmosphere softened, expanded, like breath exhaled after holding too long. Not awkward silence, not anticipation, but the silence of truth, when it's finally allowed to rise without applause. Chuck Norris stood before the kneeling young man, still and quiet like an ancient statue. A breeze drifted in through the side window, ruffling the sleeve of his black shirt like a theater curtain, gently parting to reveal a dusty memory. The air was cool, but his gaze was steady. There was no triumph in his eyes, no pride, no ego of the man who had just prevailed. Only the stillness of someone who had once bowed, just like this, a long time ago. Kenzo didn't lift his head. His breath was quick but calming. His eyes stung. Somehow, in that moment, he remembered his father, the man who once held his hand and taught him how to tie his first belt. Back then, his father never yelled. He only corrected gently and said, "When you're afraid, stand firm first. The strike can come later." But his father died of illness when Kenzo was just 9. His mother remarried. Kenzo grew up in silence, and since then, he fought like it was the only way anyone would notice him, by winning. Chuck placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You don't need to apologize to me," he said, voice hoarse but warm. "Just turn back toward the right path." Kenzo lifted his face, eyes red, and nodded silently. Behind them, the other students still hadn't moved. They were like stone, but their eyes lived. They didn't know exactly what they had witnessed. A practice session, a random visit, a rare moral lesson in the digital age. Or the birth of a legend, one that would be told, not shown. Kaito Ui, the founder of Kensei Dojo, stepped out from the shadows. His shoes clicked gently on the wooden floor. His usual confident glow was gone, replaced by the look of a man who had stood on the wrong side for too long and wasn't sure how to walk forward. He stopped 2 steps from Chuck. "Giles," he said, using a name he hadn't spoken in 30 years. He couldn't say more. Chuck turned. His gaze was kind but firm. "I didn't come back to blame you, Kaito," he said softly. "I've lived like you. I chased applause. I bathed in spotlights. I traded many things to be called the strongest. But I learned, the strongest person needs no title. That sentence landed like a temple bell at midnight, not loud, but echoing endlessly.
Kaito bowed his head. Maybe I forgot that. Chuck nodded. It's okay. Just don't let your students forget. At that moment, Kaito's assistant Hiro, a man in his 30s, approached, holding a small camera. Sensei, I recorded most of what happened, he said, unsure. Is that? Should we upload it? Kaito looked at him for a long time, then turned to Chuck. Chuck glanced at the camera, then at the students, many still dazed by what they had just seen.
Why did you record it? Chuck asked Hiro. To inspire people, Hiro replied, uncertain. Chuck smiled gently. Inspiration is good, but if it comes from shaming someone, it won't last. It'll become entertainment, not a lesson. Hiro bowed his head. Kaito signaled him to power off the camera. The heavy air began to lift, like steam warmed by sunlight. Students stirred, some adjusting belts, others exchanging glances, unsure of what to say. Then, a single round of applause, tentative, soft. Then, more, gradually. Not the clapping that follows a cool move, but the kind that follows a song that moves the heart. Quiet, respectful. From within, Chuck raised his hands gently. That's enough. He stepped into the center of the dojo where the cloth had first been placed. He looked around. 30 years ago, he said, I walked out of a dojo believing I didn't belong in this world. But I was wrong. I just didn't belong at that time. He paused. His eyes met Yuta's. The smallest student. That boy is still here. In every Yuta, every kid was pushed to the back. In every silent student, no one sees. He took the cloth from his coat and held it up. This cloth once soaked blood, sweat, and tears. Today, I don't need it anymore. He gently placed it back where Kenzo had first stepped on it. Now it belongs to all of you. Not to wipe wounds, but to remind you, every wound can heal if you remember why it came. No one spoke. Then a young woman, around 18, standing at the front of the class, quietly stepped forward. She knelt before the cloth and bowed deeply. Then another, and another. Within minutes, nearly the entire dojo knelt in a silent circle around the cloth. No instruction, no signal, just understanding. At the edge of the room, Kaito watched, his throat tight. Those bowed heads no longer looked at him with the idolizing awe he once craved, but with something more real. Trust, compassion, truth. And something in him broke, not his pride, but the armor that had held it too long. He stepped forward and bowed before Chuck Norris. Charles, or Chuck, he said, his voice trembling. I want to learn again, if you'll allow me. Not to learn how to kick, but to learn how to stand still the way you did today. Chuck smiled. I don't teach anymore, but there's a teacher always ready to guide you. Who? Kaito asked. Chuck looked toward the clock. It's lying right there. No one could remember how long the old rag had sat in the middle of the dojo. Time was no longer measured by seconds, but by breaths, heartbeats, reverberations. Something had shifted, not just in the room, but in everyone present. From the youngest like Yuta, to the cocky teens, once obsessed with their perfect spinning kicks, to Kaito himself, once so certain his dojo was a fusion of modern martial arts and entertainment, all now felt something they couldn't name. The way of martial arts had returned. Not the kind that's hashtagged on TikTok. Not the kind shouted after every flashy strike. But the ancient, quiet kind. Alive in bare feet on wooden floors, in each steady breath of a deep stance, and in the stillness between two gusts of wind, Chuck Norris stepped away from the circle, leaving behind the cloth as a living relic. He had no more to say, because when words are spoken at the right time, they echo longer than any applause. But just as he was leaving, Yuta ran after him, holding a small item. "Sir," the boy said, voice trembling. Chuck turned. Yuta held out a new handkerchief, clean, soft, still smelling of detergent. I want you to keep this," Yuta said shyly, "in case you fall, so you'll have something to wipe with." Chuck looked at the cloth and chuckled, a soft, warm sound, like sunlight slipping through a cracked door. "Thank you, Yuta," he said, bowing, "but I think I won't be needing it." Yuta looked confused. Chuck knelt and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Because the one who'll stop me from falling is you." Yuta's eyes lit up. Not because he was praised, but because, for the first time in his life, an adult believed in him, not for his strength, but for his persistence and kindness. At that moment, Kaito returned, holding a small wooden box. He opened it to reveal an old letter, yellowed with time, and a frayed black belt, no longer showing its rank, only 3 embroidered white kanji. "Shoshin?" "This," Kaito said, his voice drifting to some distant place, "belonged to my teacher, the man who taught me." "And the one who gave you that cloth long ago?" Chuck said nothing at first. Then he reached out with both hands and lifted the belt and letter like sacred artifacts. "He's gone?" Chuck asked. Kaito nodded. 5 years ago, quietly, as he lived. Chuck ran his hand along the belt. His eyes shimmered. "Shoshin," he whispered, "the beginner's mindset. A martial artist becomes true only when they keep the heart of a beginner for life." He spoke the old saying in Japanese, his voice soft but ringing from the depths of his chest. The dojo fell silent again. This time, not from climax, but like the calm after a storm, when one can finally see their own reflection in a muddy puddle. Kenzo stood and stepped forward. Gone was the swagger. Gone was the smirk. Only a young man, slightly humbled, quieter but deeper. "I'd like to start over," he said, "as a beginner." Chuck looked at Kaito. Kaito nodded. "Starting today, I'm a student too." Then, unexpectedly, he turned to the other students, some kneeling, some standing. "I propose," he said loudly, though his voice quavered, "we rename the dojo." Murmurs. "It won't be Kensei anymore. That name was mine. But I was an incomplete student. We'll call it Shoshin Dojo, the dojo of the beginner's mind." The murmurs stopped. Then came applause, not from Chuck, from Kenzo, then Yuta, then the entire dojo, not loud, but sacred. A new ritual, marking the birth of something more authentic. Outside, the sky had shifted to a golden dusk. Sunlight angled through the dojo windows, casting long, honey-colored beams across the wooden floor. In that golden light, Chuck quietly walked over to the dojo's wall of honor, lined with framed photos of celebrity guests, trophies, and certificates. He looked at it for a long moment, then said, "Leave everything here, but leave a blank space." "For what?" Yuta asked. "So that those who come here later will know not all things of value need to be framed." Chuck smiled. Kaito quietly removed a framed photo of himself with a famous model, took it down, and placed a blank sheet of paper inside the frame. On it, he handwrote in thin but clear strokes, "The day of rebirth, when martial arts ceased to be performance and became the shared breath of those learning how to live." At the end of the day, when the students had all gone, only the soft glow of natural light remained. Chuck put his jacket back on and walked toward the door. Kaito, Kenzo, and Yuta came to see him off. "Will you come back?" Yuta asked, eyes watery. "Maybe," Chuck said. "But remember, martial arts isn't in me. It's in you, every day, when you choose not to show off." Kenzo bowed his head. "I'll remember." Kaito extended a hand. "Thank you for everything." Chuck shook it firmly. "No need to thank me, thank yourself for choosing to change." As he stepped outside, the sun had dipped beyond the horizon. The wind was softer now. Behind him, the dojo lights were still on, but no longer blinding. They glowed like a small fire in winter. He turned one last time. The single cloth, the old cloth, still sat in the middle of the floor. No decorations, no spotlight, no labels. Just a space. But the most complete space he had ever seen. He nodded, then turned and vanished into the night. No sound. But what he left behind would remain. A few days later, the weather cooled further. The wind carried the dryness of fallen maple leaves and the rustling of trees shifting into winter. People still came to the dojo, but their footsteps were slower. They no longer came to film kicks or ask what new trick Sensei Kaito would show today. They entered with a new kind of stillness. Gentle, deliberate, reverent, like stepping into a small temple deep in the forest. The sign Kensei Dojo had been taken down. In its place, 3 kanji in bold black calligraphy on raw wood. Shoshin Dojo. Beginner's mind. No one explained the name change to outsiders, but anyone who stepped on that floor, sat in that twilight glow, or listened to the wind outside while holding a deep stance, understood. That afternoon, the dojo was quieter than usual, but everyone present was fully there. No phones, no recordings, no demands, no pressure. Only the swish of uniforms, breath, and one's own heartbeat. Kenzo stood at the front, not with a brown belt but with a white one. He had requested it from Kaito. He wanted to start again, not for others, not to prove anything, but to strip away the dust ego had left on his heart. Yuta stood in the back row but was no longer hunched. He shouted louder, clearer. His eyes followed Kenzo and glanced occasionally toward the wall on the right, where one humble frame now hung. The tattered cloth inside the simple glass. No caption, no plaque. Anyone who asked, Kaito would only say, "Here is the quietest voice we've ever heard." But it echoes the longest. At the end of class, Kaito dismissed them early, but instead of leaving, he asked everyone to sit in a circle. In his hands, a yellowed envelope, old but intact. "A letter from my teacher," he said softly. "He wrote it to me before he passed, but I never dared open it because I knew I wasn't ready. But today," he inhaled, "I want to read it. With you." He opened it. His voice trembled, but each word rang true. "Kaito, if you're reading this, I am no longer in this world. And somehow you found what I always hoped, your true self. I never wanted you to be a master. I only hoped you'd be an honest student. Not honest with others, but with yourself. You'll have students better than you, stronger even. Don't fear, don't envy. Teach them when to stop and when to advance, and when to bow. I leave you my first black belt, not because you deserved it most, but because you needed it most. And when you find someone more deserving, pass it on, not by hand, but through a lesson." Kaito stopped. His eyes were red, but no tears fell. He folded the letter and placed it in his lap, looking around the circle. "A person has already come, and he taught me, with silence, with eyes, by standing in the middle of the floor, without needing to fight. His name is Chuck Norris, but here, I think we should call him something else. He looked at the wall where the cloth now rested. Let's call him the gatekeeper of silence. The student asked quietly, Sensei, will he come back? Kaito was quiet for a long time, then shook his head. I don't think so.
Then he smiled, a strange smile, not of sadness nor joy, but the smile of a man who had learned what it means to be enough. Doesn't need to come back because he never really left. No one said anything. And in that silence, a breeze drifted through, brushing every head, every hand, every wooden beam. No one spoke, but all felt it. He was still here, like in body, but in the transformation of this space.
A dojo that once was a stage, now a sanctuary for the beginner's mind. 1 week later, a parcel arrived at the dojo.
No return address, just one handwritten word.
Yuta. The boy opened it. Inside, an old fountain pen etched faintly with words. The silence was the loudest lesson. Yuta stared at the inscription for a long time. Then he smiled. He picked up the paper and wrote his first ever letter to the gatekeeper of silence. I'm no longer afraid of standing at the end of the line. I'm no longer scared of kicking wrong, falling, or being laughed at. Because each time I fall, I remember who once stood up from that very spot. I don't know if I'll be a great martial artist someday, but I do know I want to be the kind of person who never pushes anyone out.
And when I grow up,
If someone comes to the dojo who isn't strong, fast, or skilled, I'll place a cloth in front of them and say, this is a place for those who want to learn, not to prove anything. The letter was folded and placed in a small wooden frame beside the tattered cloth. It was never sent, just left there, so anyone could read it, so anyone could add to it. And that's how the story ends.
not with a final fight.
Not with medals, not with triumphant shouts of "Yee," but with a silence deep enough to change a man.
True enough to rename a dojo, and long enough to live forever in every bare foot that steps on that wooden floor. And